Today, she said she's satisfied that the government acted professionally and did everything it could be expected to do.
The good side of it is that even though they have no building, they still have their church. They still have the church community. And they can go ahead with church, notwithstanding the fact they have no building, the building that they had.
Carson says, as far as she's concerned, it's time for the Baptist Temple congregation to pray on and move on, is how she puts it. She's still hoping that the congregation will patch things up with the IRS. Live in Washington, Tom Walker, Channel 13 Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you, Tom. Now, we wanted to know what you think about what has happened here today. In an exclusive 13 Listens poll, we asked the following question. Do you think U.S. Marshals should have taken action sooner? 36% of you say yes, they should have taken action sooner. 46% say they waited the appropriate time. 13% say they waited longer than they should have. And 5% were not sure. This standoff between the Indianapolis Baptist Temple and the IRS has been going on 3 months. But these two sides have a history, a long history, and sometimes very fractious history. Eyewitness News reporter Roger Harvey takes a look now at the history of the battle between the Indianapolis Baptist Temple and the IRS.
Every Sunday morning for 50 years, the faithful gather here. In recent years, Pastor Greg Dixon's refusal to withhold payroll taxes for church workers put him in a battle with the IRS.
They're not going to wear us down. We're not going to go home.
15 years ago, Pastor Dixon's father, Greg Dixon Sr., led the movement of so-called New Testament churches. They believe in absolute autonomy from government, meaning they don't claim tax-exempt status and shouldn't have to pay taxes either.
It's not a tax issue. It is a control issue. It's the Internal Revenue Service trying to control the church.
The elder Dixon's views concern anti-government watchdog groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama. The center keeps track of 400 so-called patriot and militia groups around the country. Among them, the Indianapolis Baptist Temple.
I don't appreciate being lumped together with skinheads and Nazis and white supremacists and Aryans and all those people.
The fact is that he is connected with these more radical hate groups, you know, if by no other way than by his essentially playing footsie with them.
Even though the Dixons deny involvement with the militia, that did not stop militia groups from following the church's case. The federal government won in court, and church members were supposed to leave in mid-November. U.S. Marshals said repeatedly that they would seize the church. But in the meantime, loyal supporters have spent every day sleeping and eating in the Baptist Temple.
I don't think we're going to be out of here until, you know, God decides whether we're, you know, it's going to be up to him as to what happens.
Pastor Dixon stresses that the church ministry will continue once they find a new place to call home.
And that new home will be down the street at Manual High School, at least temporarily. This was well planned and well executed, and marshals are happy to say tonight no one was injured. John?
And no one arrested either, Roger, which is something of a surprise, wouldn't you say?
Yes, indeed, especially when you consider just a few months ago there were several hundred supporters here, but today only 9 people, 5 church supporters inside, and 4 members of the media.
All right, thank you, Roger. So how does this seizure sit with other members of the clergy in the Indianapolis area? Coming up on Eyewitness News at 6 o'clock, Eyewitness News reporter Jack Martin gets the clergy reaction. We'll have that coming for you tonight on Eyewitness News at 6 o'clock. I'll see you here for that and more coverage of the seizure of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple.
All right.
Reporting live from the South Side, John Stair, Channel 13 Eyewitness News. Andrea?
Thank you, John. We'll talk to you later.
Live from RTV6 Indianapolis, standing up for you. This is 6 News at 5.
Well, here it is. After 91 days, federal marshals take the temple, and 6 News is first to show you marshals making their move. The Reverends Dixon, father and son, unwillingly leave the Indianapolis Baptist Temple under federal escorts.
We've been betrayed, we've been deceived by the Bush administration.
Equally, it was as difficult, I'm sure, on the church members as it is for us.
Good afternoon to you. The big story at 5 o'clock, U.S. Marshals move on the Indianapolis Baptist Temple, and this is all to satisfy a $6 million tax debt.
Now, the seizure came almost 3 months to the day after a federal judge ordered church members to vacate the property.
Since 1987, the church has refused to pay withholding taxes. We have live team coverage. Chris Bavender talked with church members. Rafael Sanchez talked with neighbors. Cy Jenkins looks at what's next. And we begin with Jack Reinhardt on the raid and reaction. Jack.
Well, Martha, for 91 days, U.S. Marshals held fast to a federal court order mandating the seizure of the Baptist Temple. After much planning and much patience, U.S. Marshals decided that 8:30 this morning was the safest time to act. By sheer force of numbers, U.S. Marshals sought a takeover of the Baptist Temple with as little force as possible.
On back. How far? The other side of the building. You're within a police line. You got to move back.
More than 150 federal agents and Indianapolis police officers seized control of the Baptist Temple, while U.S. Marshals restrained Pastor Greg Dixon Jr. in the parking lot. Other agents found a handful of church members huddled in prayer on the church altar.
To handle this with kid gloves, one or two of them made a statement they didn't want any injuries. They'd watch out for their back.
The Reverend Greg Dixon Sr. made good on his pledge that federal agents would have to carry him off church property. Dixon passively resisted the action that he said would take the Baptist Temple out of God's hands and put it into the hands of the government.
Forgive them, O God, for raping the bride of Christ. Forgive them, O God, for what they have done today.
The former pastor, who spent 51 years in the pulpit, called the raid a surprise and a betrayal by the U.S. government.
They were going to roll the tax back, and they were going to dismiss the case. It was the deal, and we had a deal. They can say they didn't, but they had a deal.
For 3 months, U.S. Marshals planned and plotted the takeover of the Baptist Temple. Federal agents expressed concerns about threats made by armed militia groups who supported the church's stand against taxes. U.S. Marshal Frank Anderson reaffirmed his agency's intent to seize the church, but on the government's timetable.
You don't put a time limit on safety and persons' lives and so forth. There's no time limit and there's no cost that you can put on it. So it all worked out. The decision that I made and that we made as an agency was right.
Both the Marshal's Office and Indianapolis Police are non-committal about their plans to maintain a vigil of church property. But more than likely, both agencies will maintain a strong presence here, as long as interest and emotions run high at the Baptist Temple. Reporting live from the South Side, Jack Reinhardt, 6 News.
Thank you, Jack.
Now our team coverage continues with Chris Bavender live with reaction from church members, and that sounds like they're reacting right now, Chris.
That's right, Clyde. Church members started to gather here in the street in front of the temple about 3:30, and just a few minutes ago, they started a prayer service. They tell me that while they may no longer have a physical presence inside the temple, they want to let the U.S. Marshals know that spiritually, it's still theirs. It was a day Kathy Dixon knew logically would come, but her heart hoped otherwise.
After 90 days, sometimes you don't think it's going to happen some days, but every Sunday sitting in church, I knew that there was a possibility that this could be our last Sunday in the sanctuary.
The Reverend Greg Dixon's wife joined other church members who looked on in disbelief.
This meant a lot to me. My kids was all here, and it's been my life last few years since I lost my husband.
It's a sad day, but it's a glorious day in the Lord because our faith is still strong.
Ron Pollard said it was his deep faith that helped him this morning. He was one of the men carried from the church.
I was still praying. And they had sort of pulled me back and had me land on my back, and I was still praying. I didn't stop praying.
Aaron DeGrugier has spent every night here. He had just left for work when Marshals moved in.
I didn't expect it to happen. Nobody said anything last night or the nights in the past. I mean, Pastor made a brief statement on it about a week or so ago, but he believed that they weren't going to come, and we all sort of shared his faith on that.
The loss of their building didn't stop members from an impromptu service, gathering beneath a black-draped temple sign mourning the loss of their church.
It is the death of religious liberty. It's not the death of Christianity. It's the death of religious liberty.
Now, church members say they're not sure how long they'll be out here this evening. It could be half an hour. It could be all night, but they definitely plan to be back here bright and early in the morning to see what the Marshals plan to do with the church tomorrow, namely put up the boundary fence. We're live on the South Side. Chris Bavender, 6 News.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Live from RTV6 Indianapolis, standing up for you. This is 6 News at 6.
Tonight, the wait is over. The keys to the Indianapolis Baptist Temple are now in the hands of federal agents as church members and a former pastor are wheeled out of the church for the last time. And for the first time in U.S. history, the federal government has taken over a church to pay a tax debt. Thank you for joining us. I'm Martha Weaver.
And I'm Clyde Lee. Federal agents walked into the Indianapolis Baptist Temple around 8:40 this morning, forcing the last remaining church members to leave. It's the end of a decade-long fight over the church's refusal to pay taxes on its employees. We have live team coverage for you tonight. Rafael Sanchez with reaction to the move, but first, Jack Reinhart has details on what went down this morning. Jack?
Clyde, for 3 months, federal marshals tried to negotiate a peaceful surrender of the Baptist Temple. But after all of the hearings, the pleadings, and the appeals, actions spoke louder than words.
The handful of men stood at the altar weeping and praying as the sounds of the takeover rang in their ears. More than 150 federal agents and city police officers poured through the doors, ran through the building, and climbed to the roof of the Baptist Temple.
Frank Anderson read the order very civilly, and that was it. Then they asked the media guys to leave immediately. So it was very quiet and organized.
Did Dixon?
No force.
Surprise rather than force enabled federal agents to make a quick and total takeover of the 22-acre church complex. The Reverend Greg Dixon, Jr., restrained on the parking lot, pleaded his case with marshals to leave the church with his father.
I wanted to go in. I wanted to see Frank Anderson, the head marshal. Mr. Anderson finally did come out. He escorted me inside, and I was able to come out with my father, as they brought him out on a stretcher.
The U.S. Marshal said agents made sure that the Dixons, both father and son, were the last ones to leave the church property. Greg Dixon, Jr. surrendered the keys before leaving the church grounds.
Oh, God, don't let these young men go to hell.
Pastor Greg Dixon, Sr. believed that a last-minute deal with the government forgiving the tax lien would go through. But the man who spent 51 years in the pulpit preaching a message of hope was dismayed.
For the last 2 to 3 weeks, there's been no activity, and we've been betrayed, we've been deceived by the Bush administration.
For 3 months, federal agents planned the seizure of the Baptist Temple while expressing concerns about threats made by armed militias who supported the church's stand against taxes.
Nobody got hurt. We have not made any arrests, and hopefully they will continue in a peaceful resolve.
The federal agents used in the seizure of the Baptist Temple are part of an elite group trained as much in the use of restraint as they are in force. But deadly force was not needed. No force was needed today. The Baptist Temple, a Southside house of worship for 56 years, is now in the hands of the government. Reporting live from the South Side, Jack Reinhart, 6 News.
Thank you, Jack. We did talk to a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney General's office, John Ashcroft, this afternoon. The Justice Department says there is no truth to the claim that there was a deal to forgive the tax debt. As for Greg Dixon's blaming the raid on the new Attorney General, the response, Mr. Dixon should want an Attorney General who enforces the law, and Mr. Ashcroft has done so in this case.
Church members, now banned from their pews, stood behind barricades angry and in tears. Now, they knew it was coming. They hoped it would pass. Rafael Sanchez continues our live team coverage with their story. Rafael.
Well, good evening, Martha. Prayer vigil outside the Indianapolis Baptist Temple, as you can see behind me, continues. Many of the people here feel betrayed. One woman in her 70s told me she never thought she'd see the day when the government would take a church.
Bright shining as the sun.
A shout for religious freedom was followed by a self-proclaimed funeral for members of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple.
The Bible talks about how God shall draw all men unto him, and this is one of the ways he's doing it. Our church is going to be bigger and stronger because of this.
Greg DeZula draped the church's marquee with a black cloth, comparing the symbolism to when police officers mourn the death of a fallen officer.
It is the death of religious liberty. It's not the death of Christianity. It's the death of religious liberty.
News of the federal takeover brought a couple dozen church members to watch from the barricades.
I've seen my family torn apart. I had 7 grandchildren in school here, and they're in 3 different schools now.
This meant a lot to me. My kids was all here, and it's been my life last few years since I lost my husband.
Around the marquee, the impromptu prayer and funeral service went on for several minutes, where people hoped this day would never come. Back live here at the city side, as you can hear, the songs and the prayers continue outside the Indianapolis Baptist Temple. As for church members, they will hold religious services on Wednesday in Greenwood, and then they will hold Sunday services at Emmanuel High School just down the road. Live on the city's south side, Rafael Sanchez, 6 News.
Now, not everybody is upset by today's action. Neighbors of the temple say they feel for church members, but also believe the church should have paid its $6 million tax bill. Many of these folks say if they have to pay Uncle Sam taxes, then no one should be excused. They believe the government took too long to act, though.
I think it's about time they did. I mean, we all got to pay our taxes. Why shouldn't they have to pay theirs?
My boss pays his employee taxes. Your boss pays your employee taxes. Everybody's got to match that Social Security fund.
I'm sorry for their people, you know, and it has to probably be a big heartache.
I have to pay my taxes, and I'm on a widow's benefit. I don't have a lot of taxes to pay, but I have to do it, so why shouldn't they?
Neighbors did praise the federal agents for not responding in a violent manner and avoiding another Waco.
Now, there is still more to come on this story of the temple. The property is now in the hands of the IRS and will likely be sold to cover the tax bill. Still no word on who will handle the sale, though. It's been kept a secret. Expect more court action, too. The elder Greg Dixon, the one rolled out of the temple by federal agents, is set to stand trial in October for tax evasion charges stemming from that same case. So, we want to hear your opinion over the fight of the Baptist Temple and the Marshals raid this morning. Call our Talkback 6 line, 637-9788. Your comments could be played on a later newscast. And you can also voice your opinion and read more about this case online on the IndyChannel.com. Our coverage of the Baptist Temple will continue on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings at 6:30 and again tonight on 6 News at 10 on Channel 4 and right here at 11 o'clock.
Live from the heart of central Indiana, this is Channel 13 Eyewitness News at Pete.
Those sounds signaled the end of a waiting game for members of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple. But even as marshals moved in, a congregation vowed to keep the faith and not give up its federal fight.
Forgive them, O God, for what they have done today.
Tonight, prayers for a divine intervention go unanswered.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Andrea Moorhead, in for Ann Ryder.
And I'm John Stair. For the first time in 3 months, no one from the Indianapolis Baptist Temple is sleeping inside their church. The federal government took over the South Side building, leaving guards in place where the faithful kept vigil since November 14th. How the feds moved in is tonight's top story.
Federal marshals waited 91 days to move in, but once they moved fast. The seizure started just before 8:45, with agents at all the doors, on the roof, and ready to use force if necessary. The alarms went off inside, where an Eyewitness News camera captured this exclusive video. In pictures you won't see anywhere else, the handful of church members left knelt at the altar to pray. As members proclaimed their faith in God, U.S. Marshal Frank Anderson proclaimed a judge's ruling that the temple is now federal property. With that, the siege was over. Agents escorted church members outside. Most walked out, but agents carried Pastor Greg Dixon Sr. on a gurney.
Forgive them, O God, for raping the bride of Christ.
Indianapolis police blocked nearby intersections, keeping church members 2 blocks away.
We expected it, but we didn't expect it on this magnitude. I didn't think they would use this much money to close a little church that has no resistance.
In less than an hour, it was all over. And as one lone marshal guarded the front door, this building, which had been the scene of so many angry words against the government, was now fully controlled by the government and quiet.
And as federal marshals searched the building, the agent in charge of the operation called it a job well done.
We made no arrest, and that was not our intentions to come here and make a bunch of arrests. As you probably observed, the way we did this operation, we did not charge the doors and things of that sort. This was a civil action, and we treated it in a civil manner.
The federal government appointed Olympia Partners as receiver of the property. They will sell it off sometime in the future.
In our exclusive 13 Listens poll, we asked, Do you believe the government had the right to seize the temple for its refusal to pay taxes? The majority, 71% of Hoosiers surveyed, said yes. 20% said no, and 8% are not sure. Though they lost their building, congregation members say they have not lost their will to worship.
Night Beat reporter Chris Prophet continues our team coverage at the former temple tonight, where church members say they still have faith about the future. Chris?
John, that faith comes with a measure of uncertainty tonight. A church needs a building, and this congregation no longer owns one. 50 years after he founded his church, Pastor Greg Dixon is shown the door by federal marshals.
This is a sad day for America as far as religious liberty is concerned.
Dixon and his congregation have known for months that this day would come.
The Lord will give strength unto his people.
By evening, with marshals just a few feet away, the rhetoric directed toward the governmental seizure over back taxes has not waned.
Martin, what happened here today is an indictment.
Noticeably absent from an evening prayer vigil are the father-son heads of the church. The Dixons plan to preach their next sermon on Sunday at Manual High School.
What do you think it's going to feel like for the congregation on Sunday morning to be somewhere else other than here?
It's going to be time of mourning, time of grieving, time of crying.
From the once large congregation to what now amounts to a small group of supporters, there is visible concern over the future of the once powerful Baptist church.
We're not finished by any means.
As the locks are changed on the building, staff and members find themselves in a lonely and unfamiliar place, outside of their church, looking in.
Lord, through this may we become stronger and more resolved to accomplish your will.
In many respects, this church is starting from scratch. Just a few moments ago, I spoke with the younger pastor, Dixon, and he said that they will indeed rebuild. They are looking for another building to rent. They say they will never own one, and they have no plans to discontinue business as it has been. And that means that they will no longer continue paying taxes in whatever church they go to next. Reporting live at the Indianapolis Baptist Temple, Chris Prophet, Channel 13 Eyewitness News.
So this may not be the end of this whole story.
It is not.
Thank you, Chris.
You're watching WB4 Indiana, live from RTV6 Indianapolis, standing up for you. This is 6 News at 10.
The wait is over. U.S. Marshals seized the Indianapolis Baptist Temple.
It's a sad day, but it's a glorious day in the Lord because our faith is still strong.
Skycam 6 shows some church members had to be carried out, but there was never any violence and no one was hurt.
I'm glad it's over, and especially in the way it turned out.
Officials believe it is the first church ever seized by the government for failure to pay taxes. The Indianapolis Baptist Temple, tonight's big story. Good evening to you. I'm Clyde Lee.
And I'm Martha Weaver. We have live team coverage. Vicki Duncan has a one-on-one interview with the U.S. Marshal who organized that raid.
But first, Eric Weisfeld shows us what happened when police moved in. Eric?
We've been betrayed, we've been deceived by the Bush administration.
They were told it would happen, warned the day was coming. 3 months of waiting came to an abrupt end at 8:40 this morning when more than 150 federal agents and Indianapolis police officers made good on their promise.
One back.
Up on the other side of the building. Outside, U.S. Marshals restrained Pastor Greg Dixon, Jr. Inside, other church members gathered in prayer.
As the sun.
It was around 9 o'clock with agents poised on rooftops. The dogs were brought in to make sure there were no explosives in this house of worship. 5 minutes later, those church members emerged. Among them, Reverend Greg Dixon, Sr., who kept his word. He'd have to be carried out of the church when the marshals arrived.
Forgive them, O God, for raping the bride of Christ. Forgive them, O God, for what they have done today.
It was a takeover that resulted in no arrests and no violence, but it leaves behind a pastor who spent 51 years leading a congregation here. He feels he was led astray.
That they were going to roll the tax back and they were going to dismiss the case. It was the deal, and we had a deal. They can say they didn't, but they had a deal.
Also left behind is a distraught parish. Black now covers the church's sign and their cars. This group of worshipers is in mourning.
What does this mean to you today?
The end of religious liberty in our country.
We did speak with the Justice Department today. They say there was never a deal to forgive that tax debt. We're live on the South Side. Eric Weisfeld, 6 News.
Thank you, Eric.
And it's just like a big part of my life gone. My whole life gone, pretty much.
The Indianapolis Baptist Temple has been a place of worship for 50 years. Tonight, it's in the hands of the federal government, and members are left looking for another place to pray. Good evening, it's 11 o'clock. U.S. Marshals marched into the Indianapolis Baptist Temple this morning shortly at before 9 o'clock.
Church members and clergy were asked to vacate the property November 14th, but they refused. Federal agents have been waiting since then for a time when they felt that it was safe to move in. Police never had to draw their weapons as church members offered no resistance. Dr. Greg Dixon was captured from the church on a structure with his son by his side. Once outside, Dr. Dixon got off the gurney to speak.
I want you to know you're going to face God. 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 Every person that participated in the raping of God's children.
It is a very sensitive, very emotional situation. Again, I repeat, difficult for a lot of people.
After the seizure, dozens of people gathered outside. A black cloth was placed over the Indianapolis Baptist Temple sign, symbolizing what church members call a dark day.
My heart's sad. I can't believe that something like this would happen. I just felt in my heart that, no, they're not going to do this in America. But they have.
It's a devastating day for us, but we'll go on and have church.
The church was taken over a $6 million tax debt. Well, even though the building was taken over by U.S. Marshals, members remained outside all day.
And that's where we find News 8's A.J. Sterling. Now, A.J., is anyone still there tonight?
Well, Mike and Debbie, none of the church members are here, but the federal marshal remains. In fact, we're told shortly they'll be putting a metal fence up around the property to try to keep trespassers out. Now, some church members wonder if maybe they shouldn't have put up a fence earlier themselves.
How great thou art.
Even after the building was seized by federal marshals, members gathered for a makeshift service, their church leader missing from the prayers.
What happened here today is an indictment against the people who think they are free.
But all the prayer in the world would not bring back the Baptist Temple. Doors once guarded by church members are now in the hands of the government. Not an easy sight for those who spent their lives here.
Oh, how would you feel, thinking of somebody closing God's house? I can't believe it's happening.
Some of those still standing outside the barricades made this place their home away from home for 92 days, hoping maybe they could keep away the marshals.
I won't drop these people. I'll be their friends for life. And I've made many, many friends.
There are many other churches in America under attack today, and I'm determined to go and stand with them as I can, too.
Into the evening, there were still a half-dozen church members mourning the loss.
Loss of the building, yes, but none of the church. God's church is still alive, and it'll still go on.
It's really hard to look over there and know that I can't go over there and go in a building that I once was able to walk in anytime I wanted to. It's really heartbreaking.
Members say they draw strength, knowing God will someday give them more than they have lost.
That may be one reason why God caused it to happen, to bring us closer together as a whole.
Now, church services tomorrow will be held at Jonathan Bird's. Of course, the Sunday services will be held back at Manual High School. Now, Reverend Greg Dixon has been there from the very beginning. But is this the end for him? Well, News 8's, of course, Cor Harlan, of course, talked with the pastor earlier this evening at his home. He has more on his future plans. Cor?
Well, A.J., this, of course, has been a very difficult day for Pastor Dixon. Of course, a $6 million tax bill now stands between him and his church. Pastor Dixon took his wife to a Pacers game tonight to try and relax just a little bit, but even a little basketball in the middle of winter is not likely to be enough to heal the wounds that were opened up early this morning. Pastor Greg Dixon walks along the barricades that now separate him from the church that he's grown up in. As a boy, he cleaned toilets in this church. When his calling came as an adult, he came to the congregation at Indianapolis Baptist Temple. He's preached here for the last 23 years. Tuesday's seizure of the church is a day he says he'll never forget.
There's no justice to it. It's immoral. It's unethical. It's illegal what they have done. It's unconstitutional. It's unthinkable
The church building is gone, but Pastor Dixon says the entire 92-day experience that ended Tuesday morning has brought members of God's family closer together than ever before.
We've seen great growth numerically. We've seen growth spiritually. We've seen people's faith enlarged and increased. We've seen their faith built up. We have 90 ministries. All 90 ministries are still functioning as we speak. And the people have been great, and I am so proud to be the pastor of this congregation and these people.
Now, while it seems like the end may very well be near here, Mike and Debbie, Pastor Dixon tells me tonight that at this hour, in fact, right now, they are on a conference call with their attorney from Redding, California, finding out what legal maneuvering they may still have left here. There's some issue that maybe their church doesn't fall under the normal IRS code of what exactly is a church and all the rest of that. But that is something, Mike and Debbie, that they're working on at this hour. So it may seem like a dark time right now, but for members of this church, there may be brighter days ahead.
Cor Harlan reporting live. Thanks. Vicki Duncan sat down with the U.S. Marshal tonight and talked to him about the church seizure, the first ever in the U.S. Vicki.
Well, Martha, U.S. Marshal Frank Anderson told me that he had a lot of things to consider when he was talking about seizing this church. He didn't want it to turn into a Waco or into a Ruby Ridge. He had to consider not only when to take the church, but how to take it peacefully. Frank Anderson is the first African-American U.S. Marshal. Today, he became the first marshal to seize a church.
A lot of planning went into making sure that no one got hurt.
A court order authorized seizure of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple any time after November 14th, but it was up to Anderson to decide exactly when.
Some people felt that we should have done things sooner, but I refused to be pressured by people into doing this thing prematurely.
Up on the other side of the building. He considered several factors when picking the day. He didn't want children or elderly people inside. He also wanted the militias gone.
Quite well known that there were a lot of people that had other interests at heart as opposed to what the church's issues were. We were concerned about their intent.
On his end, Anderson won't talk specifics of the operation. He did say he had agents dressed in khakis and jackets instead of ninja-type uniforms. They were also told this was a civil matter to be conducted in a civil way.
You notice we didn't charge the building. Everybody walked. We were instructed, and we instructed our people that you will treat people with courtesy and respect.
This approach got Anderson his peaceful results. But did he even want to seize the church?
In the profession that we're in, oftentimes you may not agree with some of the things that you are ordered to do.
Did you agree with this one?
I enforced a court order.
And now he can say he's glad this operation is finished.
I'm glad that this is over. I'm glad that it ended as peaceful as it did.
Is a day like this a proud day or just another day?
It's a sad day of sort. It's nothing that we're rejoicing about.
Now, Mr. Anderson told me he had eyed several other days, but he wanted to get through the holidays before this happened, and he also wanted all appeals to be exhausted. Live on the South Side, Vicki Duncan, 6 News.
Live from the heart of Central Indiana, this is Channel 13 Eyewitness News at 5 o'clock.
Good evening, everyone. All is quiet at the Indianapolis Baptist Temple tonight, one day after federal marshals moved in and seized the property to pay a $6 million tax debt. And by all accounts, it was a seizure success. Eyewitness News reporter Jack Martin spoke with the man in charge of the operation, and he talked about an emotional day in his own words.
Really, in any and everything that you do, there's a civil way to resolve it.
Civil resolve, U.S. Marshal Frank Anderson says, is his credo, his approach to life and work, and ultimately his strategy in diffusing a situation rippling with passion, taking custody of the Baptist Temple as ordered by the federal court.
Obviously, you see, we did not run up to the door. We came to the door. This is a civil action, and I wanted to make sure we treated it as a civil action. Obviously, you can look at the expression on my face. This was not a happy occasion for anybody. It was obviously something that involved a lot of emotions, and I don't know if they show where I personally kneeled down with Minister Dixon and